Stop everything you're doing right now, because somewhere in America, maybe in a Houston apartment, maybe on a Chicago subway, maybe in a Los Angeles office building, someone just had their entire week destroyed by a 3-word text message. Someone else is lying in bed at 2:47 in the morning, heart pounding, mentally replaying a conversation from 4 months ago, editing their responses, rewriting the ending, living it over and over like a movie they can't turn off. Someone is refreshing their Instagram every 6 minutes, desperate for likes that will never fill the hole that lives behind their ribs. And someone, maybe you right now, is letting a stranger's tone of voice, a coworker's offhand comment, or a passing moment of failure dictate how they feel for the rest of the day. Here's what nobody is telling you. This doesn't have to be your life. What if the most successful, the most grounded, and the most genuinely free people walking the streets of this country share one ability that has nothing to do with money, talent, or connections? It's not their intelligence. It's not their luck. It's not even their discipline in the way most people think about it. It's this. They cannot be rattled. Not because they don't feel things. Not because they've gone cold. But because they've built something inside themselves. Something structural. Something architectural. That holds steady no matter what hits it. A foundation that doesn't crack when the weather changes. This book is about building that foundation inside you. By the time you finish, you'll understand, at a neurological level, why your brain reacts the way it does, and exactly how to rewire it. You'll discover why emotional fragility isn't a character flaw. It's a training deficit, and how to fix it systematically. You'll learn the art of caring deeply while remaining uncontrollable by outcomes. You'll develop a daily mental operating system so precise and so powerful that chaos becomes background noise. This isn't motivational fluff. This is a complete blueprint, researched, tested, and applicable starting today. Let's build your unbothered mind. The Fragility Epidemic. Why America is running on empty walk into any American city on any given Tuesday, and pay attention. Really pay attention. Watch the person who nearly loses it when their coffee order comes out wrong. Notice the executive who can't sleep because a board member raised an eyebrow during his presentation. Watch the college student who spirals into a 3-day depression over a comment left on their post by someone they've never met. We are living through a mental fragility epidemic, and it is absolutely everywhere. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to put on a bumper sticker. Most people in this country, despite having access to more comfort, more convenience, and more opportunity than any generation in human history, are emotionally one bad day away from falling apart. A single criticism can send a grown adult spiraling. One social rejection can rewrite someone's entire self-concept. A setback at work becomes a catastrophe. A difficult season becomes a permanent identity. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is why. The root, how we were wired. From the moment a child in America opens their eyes to the world, they are trained, systematically, persistently, and often without anyone intending it, to outsource their sense of worth. You learned early that love sometimes felt conditional, that approval came and went based on performance, that keeping the peace mattered more than speaking the truth, that being liked was survival. These lessons didn't stay in childhood. They followed you into every meeting room, every relationship, every quiet moment alone at night. They became the operating system running silently beneath everything you do. The 5 pillars of fragility. The first pillar is approval addiction. This may be the most widespread psychological dependency in modern America. and it doesn't come with a warning label. Approval addiction means you've handed the keys to your emotional state to other people. People who are busy managing their own chaos. People who are inconsistent. People who may not even be thinking about you at all. When they give you praise, you feel okay. When they don't, you don't. You've built your house on someone else's land. Think about how many things you've never said out loud because someone might not agree. How many paths you've avoided because someone might judge you for taking them. How many versions of yourself you've hidden to maintain access to someone's approval. This isn't occasional behavior. For most people, it's the default mode, running constantly, consuming energy, making real freedom impossible. The second pillar is comfort addiction. America has become extraordinarily good at eliminating friction. Same-day delivery, instant entertainment, climate-controlled everything, painless everything. This is genuinely wonderful in many ways, and psychologically catastrophic in others. When you've never learned to sit with discomfort, discomfort becomes terrifying. When you've spent years escaping every hard feeling as quickly as possible, your tolerance for difficulty drops to nearly zero. A hard conversation feels unbearable. A failed attempt feels existential. A few days of uncertainty feels like the world is ending. This creates a vicious loop. The more you avoid discomfort, the less capable you become of handling it. The less capable you are, the more threatening discomfort feels. The more threatening it feels, the harder you avoid it. And eventually, even ordinary challenges become overwhelming because you've never trained yourself to withstand anything. The third pillar is living in reaction. There is a critical difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic, impulsive, unconscious. Responding is deliberate, chosen, intentional. Most people are reacting all day long to emails, to traffic, to tone of voice, to a glance, to silence. Something happens, and before a single conscious thought occurs, they're already in it, already defensive, already angry, already anxious. They've never learned that there's a gap between what happens and how they feel about it. And in that gap is where freedom lives. When you live in reactive mode, you've essentially granted remote control of your inner life to whatever random thing crosses your path next. The rude person at the gas station, the passive-aggressive email, the news alert. You become a pinball and life keeps flipping the paddles. The fourth pillar is story addiction. When something happens, your mind doesn't just register the event. It immediately, automatically, and usually dramatically writes a story about what the event means. You don't get the promotion. The story, I'm not good enough, and I never will be. A friend doesn't text back. The story, nobody actually cares about me. A business idea fails. The story, I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at things. These stories aren't facts. They're interpretations, almost always catastrophic ones, almost always about your permanent character rather than temporary circumstances. But when you're in a fragile state, the story feels like reality. You react to the meaning you created, not to what actually happened. And the gap between those two things is enormous. The fifth pillar is zero emotional education. Think about what you learned in school. Math, history, grammar, maybe a little biology. But did anyone, a single teacher, a guidance counselor, a parent, ever sit you down and teach you how to manage your own mind? How to process anger without destroying something? How to feel fear without being governed by it? How to receive criticism without your identity dissolving? Almost nobody. We send people into the most emotionally demanding years of their lives equipped with the emotional tools of a child, because those are the last tools anyone gave them. And then we wonder why adults crumble under pressure. But here's the part that changes everything. None of this is permanent. Fragility isn't who you are. It's a result of incomplete training. Just as someone who has never lifted weights isn't weak by nature, they're just untrained. Your mind can be trained, systematically, deliberately, starting now. The rest of this book is exactly that training. The architecture of the mind. What neuroscience says about control. Your brain is not finished. This single sentence contains more liberation than most people will ever claim. Because for a long time, science believed otherwise. That the adult brain was essentially locked in, hardwired, done developing. That whatever patterns you formed in the first 2 decades of life were the patterns you carried forever. That belief was wrong, and its correction changes everything. Neuroplasticity. Your brain is a living construction site. Neuroplasticity is the brain's demonstrated ability to rewire, reorganize, and rebuild itself throughout your entire life. Every thought you think carves a microscopic groove. Every emotional response you have reinforces a pathway. Every behavior you repeat makes that behavior more automatic. This is both the source of the problem and the key to the solution. If you've spent 20 or 30 years defaulting to anxiety, defensiveness, or rumination, those pathways are deeply grooved, which is why those responses feel so natural, so automatic, so like you. But they are not you. They are learned patterns, and what was learned can be unlearned. What was built can be rebuilt. The same repetition that created your reactive patterns can create new ones. The only question is which patterns you're going to practice from this point forward. The alarm system and its override. Buried deep in your brain is a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your ancient security system, constantly scanning, constantly assessing, constantly asking, is this a threat? Should I run? Should I fight? Should I freeze? For our ancestors on the open plains of Africa, this was an extraordinary survival tool. A rustle in the grass meant a predator. A quick trigger response meant survival. Here's the problem. Your amygdala hasn't been updated for the 21st century. It still runs the same software, but now it's reacting to Instagram comments, performance reviews, unanswered texts, and passive-aggressive remarks at Thanksgiving dinner. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a charging lion and a dismissive email from your manager. Both fire the same alarm. Both flood your body with cortisol. Both send you into fight or flight before your rational mind even gets a vote. This is why smart, educated, capable people say things they immediately regret. This is why competent professionals make terrible decisions under pressure. The alarm went off. The prefrontal cortex, your rational, strategic, executive brain, got temporarily shut down, and the ancient survival brain took the wheel. But here's what changes the game. The amygdala can be retrained. Through consistent, deliberate practice, you can teach your brain to create space between stimulus and reaction. You can build new neural circuitry that allows your rational mind to engage before your emotional mind hijacks the moment. This is the neurological foundation of everything in this book. The prefrontal cortex, your true headquarters. The prefrontal cortex, sitting just behind your forehead, is the crown jewel of human cognition. It handles planning, impulse control, emotional regulation, and perspective taking. When it's online and engaged, you are at your best, thoughtful, strategic, creative, centered. Every practice in this book is designed to strengthen the prefrontal cortex and improve its communication with the amygdala, so that rather than being hijacked by emotion, you can integrate emotion into thoughtful response, not numbness, not suppression, integration. Attention as architecture. Your attention is not passive, it is generative. Where your attention goes, neural energy flows, and what gets energy gets stronger. If you spend most of your mental bandwidth scanning for threats, your brain becomes exquisitely, exhaustingly good at finding them. Danger everywhere, problems everywhere, evidence that things are going wrong everywhere. If you train your attention toward solutions, toward possibility, toward what's working, not as a denial of reality, but as a strategic allocation of mental resources, your brain begins building different circuitry. It starts noticing what you've been training it to notice. This isn't positive thinking. This is neuroscience, your reticular activating system, a neural filter that determines what rises to conscious awareness out of the overwhelming flood of sensory data hitting you every second, is programmed by your dominant thoughts, beliefs, and expectations. People who expect to find opportunities find them, not because the world is different for them, because their brain is filtering reality differently. Visualization, the neural rehearsal. Here is a fact that should change how you spend 10 minutes every morning. Your brain cannot reliably distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you visualize yourself staying calm in a difficult conversation, truly seeing it, feeling it, inhabiting it, you are not daydreaming. You are practicing. You are laying down neural pathways that make that calm response more accessible in the actual moment. Elite athletes have used this for decades. The sprinter who mentally runs the race before stepping on the track. The surgeon who mentally performs the procedure before the first incision. The principle is identical. You can use it to train your emotional responses the same way, rehearsing poise, rehearsing steadiness, rehearsing the version of yourself you are becoming. The gap, reclaiming space between what happens and how you respond. Here is the most important real estate you will ever own, the space between stimulus and response. It's not measured in square footage. It's measured in milliseconds. And right now, for most people, that space doesn't exist. Something happens and the reaction is immediate. As if cause and effect were touching, as if there were no gap at all. But the gap is always there. The work of this chapter is learning to find it, widen it, and live in it. The anatomy of a reaction. Let's slow a moment down to frame-by-frame speed. You're in a meeting in a Denver conference room. A colleague questions your approach in front of everyone. In the half-second that follows, here's what actually happens. First, your senses register the event, the words, the tone, the faces of people watching. Then, faster than conscious thought, your brain assigns meaning to that event. Maybe, she's undermining me, or everyone thinks I don't know what I'm doing, or this is happening again. Based entirely on that meaning, not the event itself, but the story about the event. Your emotional system fires. The event was neutral. The words were just words. The emotional charge came entirely from the interpretation. This is both humbling and liberating. Humbling because it reveals how much of your inner life is constructed by your own mind. Liberating because it means you have far more influence over your emotional experience than you've been told. The pause practice. The most foundational skill in this entire book is deceptively simple. Pause, not forever, not dramatically, just a breath, a beat, a single moment of deliberate interruption in the automatic sequence when you feel the first flicker of emotional activation. That initial heat of irritation, that drop in your stomach, that tightening in your chest. Pause. Don't react yet. Don't even think about what to say yet. Just create one conscious moment of space. That pause is where everything changes. In that space, ask one question. What am I making this mean? Not a lengthy analysis, not a therapy session. Just a quick, honest look at the story your mind just created. And then, consider alternatives. Maybe your colleague wasn't attacking you. Maybe she was genuinely trying to improve the outcome. Maybe the person who didn't acknowledge you in the hallway isn't dismissing you. Maybe they were lost in thought. Maybe the silence at the end of the phone call isn't rejection. Maybe they were just tired. This isn't naive optimism. This is accurate thinking, which requires acknowledging that your first interpretation is rarely the only possible one, and almost never the most accurate. Cognitive reframing, the mental judo. Cognitive reframing is what happens when you take a situation and deliberately look at it from a different angle, not to deny what's hard about it, but to refuse the most disempowering version of the story. The question isn't, why is this happening to me? The question is, what can I take from this? Not because the difficult thing isn't real, but because the second question puts you in the driver's seat. It's the difference between being a subject of your circumstances and being an active agent within them. Research in cognitive behavioral therapy, arguably the most evidence-supported form of psychological intervention that exists, consistently shows that the thoughts you think literally reshape your neural architecture. Change the thought pattern, and you change the brain. Not metaphorically, structurally. Labeling, the neuroscience of naming. Here's a small trick backed by serious brain science. Name what you're feeling. Not to wallow in it, just to identify it. I notice I'm angry right now. This is anxiety. What I'm feeling is disappointment. This act of labeling, putting the emotion into words, actually dampens its intensity at the neurological level. Naming an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces activity in the amygdala. You're quite literally thinking your way down from the emotional ceiling. The distance created by labeling is the difference between being angry and observing anger, between being swept away and watching the wave. The body as a gateway. Emotions are not just mental events. They live in the body, in the breath, the muscles, the posture, the gut, which means the body is also a doorway back to calm. Controlled breathing, specifically exhaling longer than you inhale, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the biological counterweight to the stress response. 4 counts in. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. Repeat 3 times. Your body doesn't know the meeting is still happening. It just knows the signal it's receiving says, the emergency is over. Progressive muscle relaxation works on the same principle in reverse. Consciously releasing tension in your face, your jaw, your shoulders sends your brain the message, we are safe. And the emotional system begins to settle accordingly. Emotional Aikido. The most advanced version of emotional regulation isn't suppression, and it isn't management. It's channeling. Emotional Aikido, borrowing from the martial art that uses an attacker's energy rather than opposing it, means learning to work with emotional energy rather than fighting against it. The anger you feel at an injustice contains energy. Channel it into determined action, not destructive expression. The fear you feel before a big moment contains heightened awareness. Use that awareness to be sharper, not more scattered. The grief that comes with loss clarifies what genuinely mattered to you. Let it inform your priorities rather than erase your functioning. Emotions are not the enemy. They are fuel. The question is what you're driving toward. Building a foundation that doesn't move. There is a particular kind of person you may have encountered, maybe once, maybe a handful of times in your life, who seems to operate from a different center of gravity. Not cold, not distant, not checked out from life, but steady, genuinely, constitutionally steady. You can watch bad news hit them and see them absorb it without collapsing. You can watch someone challenge them and see them engage without crumbling. They don't need the room to like them. They don't need the outcome to validate them. There is something in them that the weather doesn't touch. That quality isn't a personality type. It's a structure, and structures can be built. Unshakable self-worth, the foundation beneath the foundation. Most people's self-worth is a barometer, rising and falling with every external reading. A compliment and it climbs, a criticism and it drops, a success and it soars, a failure and it bottoms out. This is exhausting, and it makes genuine stability impossible because you have no control over the external conditions your worth depends on. Real inner strength begins with decoupling your self-worth from external feedback. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to results or immune to feedback. It means locating your fundamental value somewhere that external events cannot reach, in your character, your commitments, your way of engaging with the world. You are not your LinkedIn title. You are not your bank balance. You are not your last achievement or your most recent failure. You are not what someone thinks of you after one conversation or even after a lifetime of interactions. These are all real things, but they are all circumstances, temporary, fluctuating, incomplete. Your worth as a human being is not a variable. It doesn't need to be earned, proved, or defended. When you genuinely internalize this, not just intellectually but structurally, criticism becomes information instead of a verdict. Failure becomes data instead of a death sentence. Other people's approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Like getting a table by the window. Nice when it happens, not required for the meal. Emotional independence. Emotional independence is not emotional isolation. It is the cultivated ability to access your own steadiness from the inside, rather than importing it from the outside. Most people's peace is conditional. I'll be okay when things go better. I'll feel confident when people stop doubting me. I'll feel secure when the uncertainty resolves. This conditionality means they are perpetually waiting to feel okay, waiting for circumstances that may or may not arrive, in a form that may or may not satisfy. Emotional independence means you bring the weather. You can be disappointed by outcomes without being devastated by them. You can prefer agreement without requiring it. You can want success without your entire sense of self riding on it. This is not detachment from life. It's freedom within it. Mental toughness, staying in the room. Mental toughness is not loudness. It is not aggression. It is not the refusal to feel. Mental toughness is the quiet, sustained commitment to staying engaged with what is hard. To not abandoning the difficult conversation, not quitting the challenging project, not retreating from the uncomfortable situation, while remaining ethically and emotionally intact. It is built through progressive exposure to resistance. Just as muscle grows by repeatedly engaging with weight that challenges it, mental toughness grows by repeatedly engaging with discomfort that you stay with rather than flee from. Every time you choose the harder thing, the honest conversation, the delayed gratification, the maintained standard when breaking it would be easier, you are building, not dramatically, quietly, cumulatively. And one day you will look back and realize that you have become someone who does not fold. Strategic clarity under pressure. When pressure arrives, most people's thinking narrows. Perspective collapses. The urgent crowds out the important. Emotional reactivity hijacks decision-making, and people do and say things they'll spend the next week apologizing for. Inner strength includes the ability to think strategically in exactly those moments, to mentally step back, even briefly, and ask, what do I actually want to create here? What response will I be proud of when this passes? This strategic thinking also involves perspective taking, the ability to zoom out from the immediate, emotionally charged moment and view it from the distance of weeks or months. Most things that feel catastrophic in the moment are minor footnotes when viewed from that distance. Not all things, but most. And knowing the difference is a skill worth developing. Self-soothing, your internal first responder. Here is something worth sitting with. The most important relationship you will ever manage is the relationship you have with your own internal experience. Most people were never taught to self-regulate. They were soothed by others as children and never developed the internal mechanisms to do it themselves. So, as adults, when the storm comes, they reach for external sources of stabilization, reassurance, distraction, substances, constant busyness, the dopamine of their phone. These work temporarily, and they prevent the development of the real capability. Learning to self-soothe means developing your own inner first responder, the part of you that can say in the middle of the storm, "I've been here before. I made it through. I know what to do. I'm gonna be okay." And to mean it, not as a platitude, but as a demonstrated fact, backed by evidence from your own history. The discipline of not caring about the wrong things. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that is epidemic in the United States right now, and it doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from caring too much, about too many things, for too many people, in too many directions, without ever choosing which things actually deserve your emotional energy. Most people walk through their days like open wounds. Every opinion gets in. Every criticism lands. Every social media post that implies their life should look different draws blood. They are porous in the worst way, absorbing everything without filtering anything. Strategic detachment, the art of choosing your battles. Strategic detachment is not apathy. It is curation. It is the conscious, deliberate practice of deciding what gets your emotional investment and being ruthless about everything that doesn't make the cut. Here's the distinction that makes this work. You can care about something without being controlled by it. You can want an outcome without your stability depending on it. You can have preferences, strong ones, without those preferences having power over your peace when they go unmet. The person who confuses caring with attachment is perpetually anxious. They think, "If I don't worry about it, I don't care." But worry is not a measure of love or commitment. It is a measure of attachment to outcomes you can't control. And it makes you less effective, not more, because anxiety clouds judgment, desperation clouds communication, and emotional reactivity clouds every room it enters, controllable versus uncontrollable. The only filter that matters. The Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome built entire philosophical systems on a single distinction: what is within your control and what is not. Your thoughts, decisions, responses, efforts, and values, these are yours. They belong to you completely. Pour your energy here without reservation. Other people's choices, external circumstances, economic conditions, traffic, weather, other people's opinions of you, what happened yesterday, these are not yours. They belong to the universe. Pouring your energy here is a guaranteed loss because you will always be fighting a battle you cannot win. This does not mean being indifferent to things outside your control. You can have preferences. You can advocate, influence, and act. But the moment you've done what is yours to do, the moment you've acted from your values and made your best effort, the outcome is no longer in your jurisdiction. And keeping your emotional energy invested in what happens after that is not care. It is suffering. Proportionality, matching your response to what's actually happening. One of the most underrated skills in emotional life is proportionality, the ability to match the size of your response to the actual significance of the event. Most people have terrible proportionality. A coffee spill triggers road rage intensity. A mildly critical comment triggers existential review. A single setback triggers catastrophic narratives. The scale of the response has no relationship to the scale of the event. When you're in the middle of an oversized reaction, ask, will this matter in a month, in a year, in a decade? Not to dismiss what you're feeling. Feelings are real, always, but to calibrate, to make sure the response you're building is actually the right size for what happened. Save your full emotional intensity for things that actually warrant it. The rest gets managed efficiently and moved through cleanly. Protecting your mental diet. Every piece of content you consume is either strengthening your mind or weakening it. Every conversation you participate in is either building your psychological resources or depleting them. There is no neutral territory. This is not paranoia. This is environmental design. The news media is engineered, structurally and algorithmically, to activate your threat response. Because threatened, anxious people keep watching. Social media platforms profit from your comparison, insecurity, and outrage, because those emotional states generate engagement. The attention economy runs on your psychological vulnerability, and it has been optimized to exploit it at a level of sophistication that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. Being strategic about your information environment is not naivety or avoidance. It is self-defense. You can stay informed without consuming trauma on a loop. You can stay connected without submitting your self-worth to the approval of an algorithm. Choose what enters the building. Not everything deserves a key. The voice in your head, mastering your internal dialogue. There is a voice that has been talking to you every waking moment of your life. It was there when you got dressed this morning. It's there when you lie awake at night. It provides running commentary on everything you do, everyone you meet, every situation you navigate. And if you're like most people, you've never stopped to question it, because it sounds so much like you that you've assumed it is you. It isn't. The inherited narrator, your internal voice, that constant stream of evaluation, judgment, warning, and interpretation, was not authored by you. It was assembled over years from fragments of other voices. Your parents' anxieties, your teacher's doubts, cultural messages about what success looks like, what you should weigh, what you should earn, what you should be afraid of. You absorb these messages as a child because children have no filter. They take in the psychological world around them the way a sponge takes in water, completely, indiscriminately, without choosing. And then they grow up and carry that absorbed programming as if it were their own perspective. It isn't. But it runs the show until you decide to change the software. Becoming conscious of the stream. The first step in mastering your internal dialogue is a radical act of observation. Stop and listen to it. Most people go through entire days without once pausing to notice what their mind is actually saying. They just live inside the commentary, reacting to it without ever questioning it. Start noticing. When you face a challenge, what does the voice say? When someone criticizes you, what does the voice make of it? When you consider a risk, what predictions does the voice offer? You'll likely discover several recurring characters. The worrier, who scans constantly for what could go wrong. The critic, who keeps score of every shortcoming. The victim, who frames events as proof that life is unfair and you are powerless. These are patterns, not truths. They are voices on a recording that has been playing so long you forgot it was a recording. Challenging the narrative. A thought appearing in your mind does not make it true. This sounds obvious. Most people don't live like they believe it. You have the ability and the responsibility to evaluate your thoughts the same way you'd evaluate a claim from a stranger. What's the evidence? Is this accurate? Is this the only possible interpretation? Would I accept this framing if someone said it to a friend? When your internal voice says, "I always mess things up," that's not a report. It's a narrative. Challenge it. Always. Every time. What are the actual instances that support this? What are the instances that contradict it? This is not about becoming unrealistically positive. It's about becoming honest, which almost always turns out to be more hopeful than the catastrophic default narrative your mind reaches for under stress. Strategic self-talk. Writing new software. Once you've started catching and questioning the old patterns, you can begin the deliberate work of programming new ones. Strategic self-talk is not affirmation theater. It's not repeating, "I am confident and powerful" in the mirror until you feel weird. It's choosing accurate, empowering perspectives and practicing them until they become your mental default. Instead of, "I can't handle this. I've handled hard things before. I can figure this out." Instead of, "Everyone is judging me." Most people are too caught up in their own experience to be tracking mine closely. Instead of, "This is a disaster. This is difficult, and I'm capable of navigating difficult things." The standard for strategic self-talk is not optimism. It's accuracy, and it turns out that accurate thinking, when you actually interrogate the catastrophic narratives your brain defaults to under stress, is almost always less bleak than your first instinct. Repetition is the mechanism. You are not simply changing what you think. You are building new neural pathways. That takes time and consistency. But every repetition is a real, measurable, physical event in your brain. A synapse strengthening, a pattern becoming more automatic. You are doing the work even when it doesn't feel dramatic. Daily mental conditioning. The system that makes everything else work. Knowledge is not enough. You can understand every principle in this book, the neuroscience, the frameworks, the strategies, and still wake up tomorrow running the same old patterns. Because understanding something and conditioning yourself to live it are two completely different processes. A marathon runner doesn't just read about running. They run every day, progressively with intention. Mental conditioning works the same way. Morning protocol. Owning the first hour. The first 30 to 60 minutes of your morning are more neurologically significant than almost any other time of day. Your brain is just emerging from sleep, highly suggestible, beginning to form the tonal architecture of the day. What you feed it in that window shapes the psychological environment you'll operate in for the next 16 hours. Most Americans hand this window over immediately. They wake and reach for their phone, and within 2 minutes they've ingested news, notifications, comparisons, and other people's emotional emergencies before their own nervous system has fully come online. Own your morning instead. Begin with intention setting, not a to-do list, but a psychological intention. Who do you want to be today? Not what do you want to accomplish, but how do you want to show up? Calm, present, generous, grounded. Name it consciously. Your brain responds to declared states. Follow with mental rehearsal. Visualize the potentially challenging moments of the upcoming day, not to catastrophize, but to prepare. See yourself navigating them with the version of yourself you're building. A few minutes of this is worth more than hours of reactive damage control later. Add a gratitude practice, not because gratitude makes hard things go away, but because it trains your reticular activating system to notice what's working. Over time, this retrains your brain's default filtering away from threat scanning and toward possibility recognition. Stress inoculation. Seeking manageable difficulty. Vaccines work by introducing a small, manageable dose of a pathogen so the immune system can build its response before the real threat arrives. Mental stress inoculation works the same way. You deliberately place yourself in situations that are slightly uncomfortable. Cold showers, hard conversations, fasting, public speaking, physically demanding exercise, not as punishment, but as practice. You are teaching your nervous system, I can be uncomfortable and remain intact. Discomfort is not danger. Each time you successfully stay with something hard without fleeing, you build evidence. You prove to yourself, at the experiential level, which is deeper than the intellectual level, that you can handle difficulty. This evidence compounds. It becomes the bedrock of genuine, tested confidence rather than the paper-thin kind built on nothing but hope. Evening review. Mining your day for strength. Before you sleep, spend 5 minutes reviewing the day, not to ruminate or criticize, but to extract. Identify the moments when you showed up as the version of yourself you're building. Reinforce them. Commit them to memory. These moments are real data about who you are becoming. Also, identify the moments when old patterns ran the show. Don't judge them. Study them. What triggered the reaction? What story ran? What would the response have been if your best self had been driving? Mentally rehearse that better response, because your brain will file that rehearsal alongside the real experience. And next time, the better response will be slightly more accessible. This process prevents the common trap of endlessly repeating the same patterns without growing. Every day becomes training. Every experience becomes material. Daily mindfulness. The 10-minute investment. You don't need to become a monk. You don't need an app, a cushion, or a playlist. You need 10 minutes daily to sit quietly, observe your thoughts without following them, and practice returning your attention to the present moment when it wanders, which it will, constantly. And that's the whole point. Mindfulness is not about achieving a blank mind. It's about training the muscle of meta-awareness, the ability to notice what your mind is doing rather than just being what your mind is doing. This is the core skill underneath every other practice in this book, and it takes 10 minutes a day to build. Emotional armor, protecting your peace without losing your heart. Somebody is going to be rude to you today. Someone is going to be dismissive, critical, passive-aggressive, or emotionally careless. This isn't cynicism. This is just the condition of being a person in the world, surrounded by other people who are carrying their own unprocessed pain and projecting it outward. The question is not whether these moments will happen. The question is how much real estate you're going to give them inside you. It's never really about you. The most liberating insight in navigating difficult people is also the most counterintuitive one. Their behavior toward you is almost never actually about you. When someone is contemptuous, it reveals their contempt. When someone is dismissive, it reveals their pattern of dismissing. When someone is threatened by your success, it reveals their relationship with their own worth. Their behavior is a window into their interior world, their wounds, their conditioning, their fears. It is not an accurate read of your value. This shifts everything. Instead of, what did I do to deserve this? You think, this person is clearly carrying something heavy right now. You can hold space for that without absorbing it. You can be compassionate without becoming a target. Outcome. Detachment in social settings. Social anxiety at its core is an attachment problem. Specifically, a desperate attachment to how other people respond to you. You need them to laugh. You need them to agree. You need them to like you. And because you have no control over any of those outcomes, social situations become minefields. Outcome detachment in social contexts means this: you show up authentically, you offer your genuine self, and you release the outcome, not indifferently. You can hope for connection, you can prefer agreement, but you don't need it to feel okay. Ironically, this makes you more compelling. The person who doesn't need your approval is the most magnetic person in any room, because their attention is a gift given freely rather than a service performed in exchange for validation. Psychological boundaries, where you end and others begin. Many people experience other people's emotions as if they were their own. Someone near them is angry and they feel anxious. Someone near them is sad and they feel responsible for fixing it. Someone near them is critical and their own sense of worth wobbles. This is the absence of psychological boundaries, and it is an exhausting, unsustainable way to move through the world. A psychological boundary is a clear internal distinction. Their feelings are theirs. Their choices are theirs. Their story is theirs. You can be present. You can care. You can support. But you are not the custodian of another adult's emotional experience, and taking on that role doesn't help them. It depletes you and enables them to outsource their emotional regulation indefinitely. Setting psychological boundaries isn't cruelty. It's the prerequisite for genuine care, the kind given from abundance rather than from exhaustion. Recognizing and neutralizing. Manipulation, emotional manipulation, is not rare. It is common, often unconscious, sometimes deliberate, always recognizable once you know the patterns. Guilt is used to override your preferences by making your choices feel like acts of cruelty. Anger is used to intimidate you into compliance. Performed helplessness is used to transfer responsibility. Victim narratives are used to make your boundaries feel like violence. You do not have to be hostile toward any of this, but you have to see it clearly. And when you do, you can respond without being pulled in. I hear that you're frustrated. When things are calmer, I'm glad to talk about it. You acknowledge the emotion. You decline the manipulation. You hold the line. Energy accounting. Your psychological energy is finite. This is a biological fact, not a philosophy. Some interactions leave you more resourced than when you started, energized, expanded, clearer. Others reliably drain you, leaving you depleted, heavy, or destabilized. Both types of people exist in most people's lives. This isn't about labeling people as good or bad. It's about being honest with yourself about the effects of different relationships and making intelligent choices about your investments. You don't have to write anyone off, but you have the right and the responsibility to be strategic about how much of your finite psychological energy you're allocating to each relationship and context. From reaction to response. The strategic upgrade. There is a version of you that exists in the space between what happens and what you do next. That version doesn't get hijacked by tone of voice, doesn't take the bait in pointless arguments, doesn't make decisions in the middle of emotional storms that they'll spend weeks cleaning up afterward. That version is not a fantasy. It is a developed capacity, and you build it the same way you build anything, through deliberate practice, progressive challenge, and honest reflection. Knowing your triggers before you can respond. Strategically, you need to know yourself honestly. What specific situations, behaviors, or words reliably activate your automatic patterns? Common trigger categories include feeling disrespected or dismissed, feeling controlled or micromanaged, feeling unheard or invisible, feeling accused of something unfair. These aren't weaknesses, they're maps. Once you know where the tripwires are, you can prepare. For each major trigger, develop a prepared response in advance. When you're calm, when your prefrontal cortex is fully engaged, You might prepare. When I feel dismissed in a meeting, I'll ask, "Help me understand your concern." This prepared response short-circuits the automatic pattern and buys you the seconds you need to choose deliberately. The strategic pause. Revisited. Every time you want to react immediately and don't, every time you create even a 2-second pause and ask, what response will I be proud of? You are practicing the most important skill in this entire framework. The pause doesn't have to be noticeable. A breath, a brief moment of internal consultation. You're not being slow. You're being strategic. And the decision you make in that pause will almost always be better than the one you would have made in the reactive instant before it. Response, flexibility. Rigid patterns make you predictable and limit your effectiveness. The person who always gets defensive, who always avoids conflict, who always escalates, they're running on a single setting, regardless of what the situation actually requires. Response flexibility means developing a repertoire. When criticism arrives, sometimes the right move is to engage and ask questions. Sometimes it's to thank someone genuinely and reflect later. Sometimes it's to decline the premise of the criticism respectfully. You need more than one move. This flexibility also means matching your response intensity to the actual scale of the event. Not every problem deserves a full emotional mobilization. Allocate accordingly. Outcome orientation. The North Star of strategic response. When you're emotionally reactive, the question running your behavior is, how do I feel right now? When you're operating strategically, the question running your behavior is, what do I want to create here? This single shift changes everything. It moves you from expression to intention, from relief to outcome, from proving a point to building a result. You can still feel the emotion fully, genuinely, but you let the desired outcome guide what you do with it. Sometimes the strategic move is to say nothing. Sometimes it's to express vulnerability rather than defense. Sometimes it's to ask a question rather than make a statement. The emotion informs, your intention commands. Mental discipline, the bridge between knowing and living. Everything you've read so far is knowledge, useful knowledge, but knowledge doesn't change a life. Practice does. Mental discipline is the mechanism by which knowledge becomes behavior, behavior becomes habit, and habit becomes character. Identity over rules. Here is the critical insight about discipline that most people miss. Discipline sustained purely by willpower is always temporary, because willpower is a depleting resource. Discipline that aligns with identity is self-sustaining, because you're not fighting yourself. You're being yourself. The difference between "I should be more patient" and "I am someone who responds thoughtfully." The first is a rule. Rules can be broken. The second is an identity. When behavior violates identity, dissonance arises, and the motivation to realign is intrinsic rather than imposed. Start building discipline by declaring an identity, not by setting rules. Not, "I will meditate every morning," but "I am someone who prioritizes their psychological health." The practice follows from the identity as a natural expression, not an obligation. Decision pre-commitment. The most psychologically vulnerable moments of any given day are the ones where you're stressed, tired, or emotionally activated, and you're asked to make a decision. In those moments, your judgment is compromised. The old patterns have the advantage. Pre-commitment neutralizes this by moving important decisions upstream to a time when you're resourced and clear. You decide in advance. I never respond to difficult emails in the same moment I read them. I always sleep before making major decisions when I'm upset. I maintain my morning practice even when I don't feel like it, because I've decided that's who I am. These pre-commitments become psychological guardrails that hold you on course when the conditions for good judgment are worst. Progressive challenge. Discipline grows through progressive challenge, starting where you actually are, not where you wish you were, and gradually expanding your capacity from that honest starting point. Start with commitments so small, they're almost impossible to fail. 5 minutes of morning reflection. One pause before one type of trigger. One day without unconsciously scrolling. These small wins aren't trivial. They are building evidence, proof that you are someone who follows through. And that evidence accumulates into genuine self-trust, which is the foundation of unshakable discipline. Environmental design. You are not just a brain in a jar. You are a creature enormously shaped by your environment, what you see, hear, and have easy access to throughout your day. Build your environment deliberately. Place what supports your goals where it's easiest to reach. Remove what undermines them. Surround yourself with people who model the qualities you're building. Your environment should be working with you, not against you. This isn't weakness. It's intelligence. Stress immunity, beyond management into mastery. Most of what is taught about stress management is about coping with stress after it's arrived. Cold water, deep breaths, time off. These are useful, but they're all reactive. They're treating the symptom while the underlying vulnerability remains intact. Stress immunity is different. It's the development of a nervous system that doesn't overreact to the presence of pressure. A nervous system trained, through progressive and deliberate exposure, to remain regulated even in conditions that would overwhelm most people. The interpretation differential. Here is a consistent finding in stress research. The stress response is not triggered by external events. It's triggered by your interpretation of external events. Two people face the same high-stakes presentation. One experiences the arousal as exciting, heightened focus, sharpened attention, readied energy. The other experiences the same physiological arousal as terror. The neurological event is identical. The interpretation is everything. People who have developed stress immunity have trained themselves to interpret challenging situations through the lens of opportunity rather than threat. Not because they're naive, but because that framing is more accurate, more empowering, and ultimately more effective for performance. Preemptive calm. Rather than waiting for stress to arrive and then scrambling to manage it, load your nervous system with calm before you enter high-pressure situations. 5 minutes of controlled breathing before a difficult conversation. A brief visualization of steady, grounded performance before a high-stakes meeting. A physical reset, movement, a moment of silence, a change of environment. Before engaging with something demanding, you're establishing a neurological baseline. The higher your baseline calm when you enter a pressure situation, the more resilience capacity you have to absorb and process what comes. Compartmentalization. Life's challenges don't schedule appointments around each other. Relationship stress arrives while a work crisis is still in progress. Financial strain continues while a health challenge begins. The temptation is to let everything compound into one overwhelming mass. Compartmentalization is the deliberate practice of containing each challenge within its appropriate domain, dealing with the work problem at work, the relationship problem at home, rather than letting them bleed together into a single, unmanageable weight. This requires psychological boundaries between domains and specific transition rituals that help your nervous system shift contexts. Even something as simple as a 5-minute walk and a conscious declaration, "I'm leaving work at work now," begins training this capacity. Using stress as fuel. The physiological state we call stress, elevated cortisol, Heightened arousal, increased alertness, is the same physiological state we call excitement. The difference is the meaning assigned. When you learn to redirect stress energy toward productive action rather than catastrophic thinking, it becomes a resource. The heightened alertness sharpens your focus. The increased energy powers your output. The bodily mobilization prepares you for peak performance. The question isn't, how do I eliminate this feeling? It's, where should I direct this energy? The architecture of unshakable confidence. Real confidence, the kind that holds under pressure, that doesn't require constant external reinforcement, that remains steady when outcomes disappoint, is built on an entirely different foundation than most people think. It is not built on success. Success-based confidence is fragile because success is not always within your control. It is not built on other people's approval. Approval-based confidence is the most precarious structure imaginable. It is built on process, competence, failure integration, and identity clarity. And each of these can be developed deliberately and systematically. Process confidence. When your confidence is tied to outcomes, every high-stakes situation becomes a test of your worth, and you either avoid the test or perform it with the handicap of desperation. Neither produces good results. When your confidence is tied to your process, your preparation, your integrity, your genuine effort, outcomes become informative rather than defining. You can take appropriate risks because your confidence doesn't hinge on the result. You can receive feedback because you're committed to growth, not defended around an identity. You can fail and recover because the failure didn't reach the part of you that knows your worth. Competence-based confidence. There is no substitute for actually knowing what you're doing. Genuine skill development, real, honest, practiced capability, provides a foundation for confidence that no amount of positive thinking can manufacture. This requires honest assessment of where you currently are, not where you wish you were, and systematic effort to build skill in the areas that matter to your goals and your values. This confidence grows quietly, steadily, and holds up under examination because it's backed by something real. Failure integration. The people with the most durable confidence are not the ones who fail least. They are the ones who fail and remain intact, who extract the lesson, recalibrate, and re-engage rather than collapsing or retreating. Failure integration means developing a relationship with setbacks that is neither catastrophizing nor dismissive. The failure happened. It contains information. What does it tell me? What do I do differently? And then, back to work. Every failure you successfully integrate, every time you go down and come back stronger, adds to the body of evidence that you are resilient, adaptable, and capable of handling the real conditions of building anything meaningful. That evidence is worth more, psychologically, than any number of unbroken success streaks. Identity clarity. The deepest layer of unshakable confidence is knowing who you are beneath the circumstances, what you value, what you stand for, how you want to engage with the world, in a way that doesn't change based on external feedback. When your identity is clear and stable, other people's opinions of you become interesting, but not authoritative. You can hear criticism without being destabilized by it. You can be unpopular in a particular room without needing to revise your core. You have a reference point that circumstances cannot reach. This clarity is built through honest self-examination, through acting in alignment with your stated values even when it's costly, and through the accumulated evidence of a life lived with integrity rather than performance. Curating your mental environment. You spend significant energy maintaining your physical environment. You clean your home, organize your workspace, choose your neighborhood. You wouldn't tolerate toxic air in your house. But most people never apply the same care to their mental environment, to the information they consume, the conversations they participate in, the thoughts they entertain, the voices they amplify. And the mental environment affects the quality of your inner life at least as much as the physical environment affects your physical health. Your information diet. You have never in human history had more access to information, and you have never been more consistently manipulated by the architecture of that information. This is not a conspiracy. It's a business model, and it runs on your psychological vulnerability. Outrage keeps eyes on screens longer than satisfaction does. Anxiety generates more clicks than contentment. The comparison your friend's curated Instagram post generates in you is not an accidental side effect. It's the product. Being deliberate about your information diet means choosing sources that inform and elevate rather than agitate and exhaust. It means distinguishing between information that is genuinely useful to your life and information that is simply emotionally stimulating. And it means having clear limits on when and how much. Not because ignorance is bliss, but because consuming toxic content compulsively is not the same thing as staying informed. Thought pattern management. Your mind has default patterns, grooves worn deep through repetition, and left alone, it will run those patterns automatically. Worry, comparison, rumination, self-criticism. These are not who you are. They are what your mind does when you aren't directing it. Direction is the practice. When you notice the default patterns running, you redirect, not by forcing the thought to stop, but by consciously choosing a different focus. Over time, the redirected patterns become just as automatic as the old ones. This takes months, not days. But it is real, measurable neurological change. Curating your social environment. Humans are deeply biologically social creatures. The people you spend time with are not just pleasant or unpleasant company. They are, through a process researchers call social contagion, literally shaping your emotional baselines, your thought patterns, and your beliefs about what's possible. This doesn't mean abandoning anyone who isn't perfectly psychologically healthy. It means being honest about who consistently elevates your thinking and who consistently drags it down, and making intelligent choices about proportional investment. Seek out actively people who model the qualities you want to develop. Read the work of people who think in ways you aspire to. Let your inner circle reflect the person you are becoming, not only the person you've been. Staying steady when everything is on fire. Everything in the earlier chapters works reasonably well in ordinary conditions. The real test is extreme pressure, the moments when stakes are high, time is short, emotions are intense, and everything is happening at once. These moments are where most people's hard-won composure comes apart, and they are exactly the moments that most need it intact. Physiological override. When extreme pressure activates your full stress response, your body is running a program that prioritizes survival over strategy. Shallow breathing, elevated heart rate, narrowed focus. Cortisol flooding every system. You can override this from the bottom up using the breath. Tactical breathing. 4 counts in through the nose. 4 counts hold. 6 counts out through the mouth. 2 counts hold empty. 3 cycles. That's less than 90 seconds. And in those 90 seconds, you're physically signaling your parasympathetic nervous system that the emergency has passed. Your heart rate slows. Your cortisol begins dropping. Your prefrontal cortex comes back online. This works, not as theory, as demonstrated, reproducible neuroscience, used by special operations forces, surgeons, elite athletes, and emergency responders, available to you starting right now. Compartmentalizing emotions without suppressing them. Under extreme pressure, the goal is not to feel nothing. Feeling is appropriate, and fighting against natural emotional responses wastes the energy you need for the challenge itself. The goal is to feel and function, to acknowledge the fear, the anger, the grief, while keeping the executive decision-making process online and operating from strategy rather than reaction. I can notice that I'm afraid right now, and I can also choose my next move carefully. Both things, simultaneously. Rapid reframing under fire. When everything is going wrong and time is short, you don't have the luxury of extended cognitive reprocessing. You need a quick, decisive shift in interpretation. The single most powerful reframe under pressure. This is exactly the kind of moment that separates who I was from who I'm becoming. It's fast, it's accurate, and it transforms the crisis from something happening to you into something happening for you. As the training ground for the version of yourself this book has been building. Post-pressure integration. After every extreme pressure experience, after the difficult conversation, the crisis, the failure, the high-stakes performance, integrate deliberately, not what went wrong and why am I terrible, but what worked, what didn't, what did I learn about my patterns, what would I do differently, and how will I practice that? This reflection is what turns each extreme experience into a deposit in your resilience account, rather than just an ordeal to survive. Over time, your track record of navigating difficulty builds the most unshakable confidence available, the kind earned through actual evidence. The unbothered life, this is what you've been building. Toward everything in this book has been pointing here, not to a destination you arrive at and stay forever, but to a way of moving through the world that, once developed, becomes native to you, as natural as breathing, as structural as the bones that hold you upright. What changes criticism still arrives. You receive it, extract what's useful, and release what isn't. Without spending the next 3 days rebuilding your sense of self around it, rejection still happens. You feel the sting, acknowledge what it means, and return to your own North Star without being permanently redirected by someone else's no. Uncertainty still exists. You stop treating it as an emergency requiring immediate resolution and start inhabiting it as the natural condition of being alive and in motion. Other people still behave badly. You see clearly what's happening, the projection, the insecurity, the unprocessed pain, and you choose your response from a place of strength rather than injury. The external world hasn't changed. You have changed. And that difference is everything. What opens up? Here's what most people don't expect. The more psychologically independent you become, the more genuinely available you are for real connection. When you're not constantly managing your own ego, protecting your insecurities, or scanning for threats to your worth, you have an entirely different quality of presence available for the people in your life. You can love without needing it to look a certain way. You can support without needing credit for it. You can be vulnerable because vulnerability is now a choice rather than a risk. Your work reaches a different level when you're operating from calm focus rather than anxious performance. Your decisions are cleaner. Your communication is clearer. Your tolerance for the inevitable difficulties of building anything meaningful is higher. And your contribution to the world, whatever form that takes, grows, because your energy is no longer consumed by psychological maintenance. It's available for creation. The paradox of the unbothered mind. The great paradox of everything you've built is this: the less you need things to go a certain way, the more effectively you can work toward the outcomes you care about. The less you need people to validate you, the more genuinely you can connect with them. The less you need certainty before you move, the more confidently you act in the face of it. The less you need to be right, the more clearly you think. The unbothered mind is not a mind that has stopped caring. It's a mind that has stopped being controlled by what it cares about. That distinction is the difference between freedom and its absence. The only question that remains: you've spent time inside a complete framework for one of the most important kinds of development available to a human being. The neuroscience, the practices, the strategies, the architecture, none of it does anything by itself. The choice that determines the quality of every day you have left is simple. Are you going to keep giving external circumstances control over your internal life? Or are you going to build the kind of interior that nothing external can compromise? There are people walking through American cities right now, through New York and Seattle, through Nashville and Phoenix, through small towns and crowded suburbs, who have made that second choice, who have done this work, who are genuinely constitutionally unbothered in the way this book has been describing. They are not extraordinary people. They did not have exceptional advantages. They simply decided to train the one thing that was always completely within their control: their own mind. The unbothered life is not a reward for a certain type of person. It is a construction, and you have everything you need to build it. Start now.